think I'm live. I'm live. Good morning. It's Sunday morning. I'm reading out of Scarlet. It's a book by Joan Grant. She was a far memory writer. She was able to write her own far memories. A seer, she was. She lived from 1907 till 1989. And she wrote many books about her far sight. One of the most known ones is The Winged Pharaoh. But she wrote quite a few of them, and I loved this one here. This is a story about Piyannah and Raki. They are cousins, and both their mothers are dead now. And they are at the tribe of Nakachi. And they've just had a battle with the black feathers. It was rather gruesome, but the battle is over. And Piyannah, Raki, and their tribe, they sent them off. They won the fight against the black feathers. This 17th reading is Death Canoe. I thought that the funerary rites would have been taken place before our return. But though the enemy had been buried by naked foreheads in a disused clay pit, which would henceforward be taboo, the last of our dead had only just been brought back to the encampment. So his companions had waited for him until they could all go together to the land of the great hunters. 73 of our braves had been killed. They lay in a semicircle between the totem and the watchfire, wrapped in their blankets, as though resting before dawn. If the friend of a brave killed in battle puts a hand on his cold forehead and speaks loudly, for it is difficult for the dead to hear, the words of the message will be carried by him beyond the sunset. And if a falling star is seen in the west, it is known that the message has been fully delivered. I wish I had thought to consult Raki as to whether we ought to ask one of them to tell Mother we had not forgotten the before people. Was it easier for the dead to hear the dead than the living? Surely she could hear our voices when we spoke to her without the sound going through the ear of a corpse. But we could not be quite sure. She would be sorrowful if all the others who had gathered to welcome our braves received news of the living, and she alone had no word from her daughter and her foster son. The encampment was hushed, except for the sound of logs being split to make the funeral pyres down the river. I went to lay my bow at the foot of the totem, to thank him for sparing my life and to tell him that I had fulfilled the dedication of my arrows in the blood of an enemy. I decided to try to find a messenger before taking the scalp to the teepee of the elders. If the dead saw it knotted to my belt, they would recognize that I was now a young brave, and so had the right to claim the privileges of a younger brother. Only 5 of the dead had been scalped. They must have followed the fleeing black feathers into the woods, for I knew that the enemy would not have had the chance to snatch a trophy in the turmoil of a losing battle. These 5 bodies now wore new scalps of bear pelt to show that they were mighty hunters and had died in victory. The fur had been stitched to the flesh of the foreheads. Little fires of aromatic twigs had been lit on each side of the row of braves, but the smoke did not keep away all the flies. Sometimes I had to brush them off before I could recognize the face they covered. The scarlet feather on my head watched smoking by the fire while we waited for him to give the signal for battle, had taken his calm with him into death. The eyes were closed and his strong hands still held the bow, and the tomahawk which he would carry on his long journey. I did not like to disturb him, so I went in search of another messenger. I saw a boy who had often spared fish with Gorky and me. He must have died by a single blow from a tomahawk. His neck had been severed, and was now carefully stitched in the shoulders with narrow strips of raw hide, so that he should not stand before the great hunters as a cripple. I was afraid to put my hand on his forehead in case the head lolled to the side. I was ashamed of this dread, and hoped he would not hear my thoughts. The arrow had been taken from the eye socket of Dorok's friend, whom I had seen die early in the battle, and a white stone painted to look like an eye put in its place. The lips were drawn back from the teeth, and he looked as though he was snarling. I was sorry, for he had always been a kindly man, and his friends beyond the sunset might think he had grown ferocious before he had time to make a spirit body to wear, instead of this fading dream of flesh. I did not realize that Barakechi had been killed until I saw him lying between two brown feathers. His face was unmarked, but decay had made blue stains around his mouth as though he had been eating elderberries. I drew back his blanket and saw an arrow wound above his left breast. I saw something move. There were maggots in the wound, maggots in Barakechi, who had always been more ready with laughter than any of us. He was kind and brave, and he had been going to join our tribe of the feathers. His death was far more real to me than any of the others. I put my hand on his forehead. Barakechi, I know you can hear me because you have always been a friend to Raki and Piyannah. You are the first of the feathers to go beyond the sunset. Will you tell my mother about the tribe, Barakechi? Tell her that Raki and I have always remembered the before people, and that if they are lonely for earth, they can come back as the children of the feathers, because our people are going to be happy together, even as they used to be. Farewell, Barakechi, until we laugh on the other side of the water, when Raki and I have joined you. There shall be 2 enemy scalps in the teepee of the elders in your name. They killed you, Barakechi, so I'm glad that I helped them to die. You are smiling because you have discovered that death is only the crossing of another mountain into a valley where there is no winner. I will remember your smile when I'm afraid. Tell my mother that we will remember. At noon the bodies were carried down to the funeral pyres, which had been lit since dawn, so that when dry wood was heaped on the core of glowing logs, it would flare up into a great intensity of heat. Each brave was carried by 2 men on a litter which had long poles, so that the bearers could stand one on each side by the fire and lower it gently into the flames. Nakachik had given permission for Raki and me to perform this last service for Barakechi. For the first time in 5 years we were dressed alike, in the doe-skin tunics of young braves, and at the back of our forehead thongs were knots of hair from an enemy scalp, a symbol of authority nearly as important as a feather. Narok had been sounding the death rhythm since dawn. Squaws lined the path to watch the progress of the dead. Some of them should have been in grief for a son or the father of their child, yet, though the hair was covered with the white ashes of mourning, there was curiosity instead of sorrow in their eyes. Even our women, who stood a little apart from the others, showed no sign of emotion. Why should they? When Barakechi was the only one of the dead to whom they had spoken, the only one with whom they might have shared their future. They had often seen hunters bring home a kill, and so most of them, a man was a more unfamiliar animal than a deer, and strangers are neither loved nor pitied. The heat of the fire was so strong that it was difficult to lower Barakechi gently. The stench of burning flesh made me want to retch. I found myself wondering how long it would be before I could eat roast meat without the same smell creeping into my nostrils. Marrakechi was only the shape of a man, black and red with fire. Soon he would fall into ash, and only a few jarred bones would show that a man and a tree had joined to light this torch of stars. In silence we stood to watch while the embers cooled. Then came the chief, in company with the elders, to take from the place where each body had been consumed a handful of ashes. These were to be placed in the death canoe, which was carried on the shoulders of 8 scarlet feathers. Nakachik held the ashes up to the sky, speaking aloud the name of the man who had died, that the tribe might live, telling of his courage and his woodcraft, telling of rapids he had conquered in a time of river's anger, telling of the animals he had killed and the bear's claw on his neck thong. Then did he call on the great hunters to accept this man, his emissary, the brave of Nakachik, chief of the tribe of the 2 trees. As he let the ashes fall into the death canoe, the name of the hero echoed and re-echoed, as we, who had been his companions, sent his herald to the hills. At sunset the bearers waded into the river until the death canoe was borne from their shoulders by the current. Gently and then faster it swept away towards the great rapid. In the west I saw a falling star, and I knew that Marrakechi and my mother smiled together because we had remembered. This was the story of the death canoe. The next one is the brown feathers, which is part 3 of this lovely book. Have a great Sunday.